Hello everyone and welcome! Yesterday a new story popped up on the universe page. A story explaining the next rework. This whole story was told through the notes of Singed, so if you really want to get into the dread of this story, I highly recommend reading it yourselves. So without further ado, let's get into the next short story, Engineering the Nightmare. As a child, Singed taught himself the ways of chemtech and biochemical experimentation. For over a century, he kept testing his skills in alchemy, prolonging his life with volatile chemicals and extensive self-performed surgery. Nothing stays in his way to acquire the knowledge he seeks, not morality, and certainly not other people. Deep inside Zone, Singed has his personal lab. It is home to all of his horrific experiments, often performed on humans. He recently brought in a new subject to continue his research, number 1088. It was a cutthroat hiding among normal people, but only Singed saw the beast within him. It required double the amount of Singed's toxins to subdue him. This resistance was exactly what he was looking for. He needed subjects that would survive the grand catalyst of pain that would provoke the transmutation, the metamorphosis that would reshape the man into a chimeric predator, and all of Zone would be its hunting grounds. Singed prepared the subject for implantation. He tested a surgical technique he observed during the Ionian campaign, to cut to his scapulae. It took him several minutes of drilling through the bone to attach the alchemical chamber and pumps that would deliver the transmutative formula. The subject wailed and pleaded. He insisted he was no longer a monster, but a good man. Singed ignored him and attached more hose to the subject's veins and muscles. The subject remained conscious and screaming for 6 hours. For Singed it was very encouraging. He endured significantly longer than the other failures. The last step was integrating the mechanical augmentations with the spine. Minimal stitching required. Subject stable and recovering. I must rest and replenish before tomorrow's procedure. When Singed approached the subject next day, it was on the floor, without hope or courage, shrinking at the slightest gesture. The subject desperately tried to get out of the chains holding it, as the chamber on its shoulder filled with the formula. The mechanism primed the alchemicals, then started pumping them in. The subject thrashed violently as the liquids filled its veins, nearly toppling the surgical table. Everything worked just like Singed predicted. Pain was the catalyst of change. Based on the subject's anatomy, the mechanism released just the right amount of toxins for the transformation. Moments later, a snapping of bones and tearing of muscles followed, reshaping the skeletal frame. Then, a jagged shard ripped through the subject's wrist. He wrenched against the bindings, pulling until the joint cracked sharply and his severed hand fell to the floor. There was a piercing wail and his entire body seized before suffering a full collapse. The transmutation had failed. I stanched the wound and stabilized the body's vital tasks. Perhaps I've overestimated the subject's tolerance for pain. I will recalibrate and begin anew tomorrow. The next day, Singed found the severed hand still on the floor, surprisingly without any signs of decay. The subject was now aggressive, shouting insults and threats. Upon examining the subject's mangled stump, Singed noticed that beneath the blood-soaked bandages was a proto-limb. It was growing back, forming an embryonic and malformed hand. Perhaps allowing more time for the serum to take effect may prove beneficial. As Singed went to sleep, he pictured a new idea in his mind. A way to turn his failure into something more. He worked until the morning on this idea, forging steel, sharpening edges, and hammering a framework. He created a structure for the new limb to grow into. The next morning, Singed got back to work. He drugged the subject and made him fall asleep, but because of his resilience he had to work swiftly. He noticed the growth of the limb slowed, but still continued. Once again, he bound the metal frame to the subject's muscle tissues, blood vessels and nerve endings. The final step was connecting it to the alchemical chamber. He then reinforced the chains and looked into more possible enhancements. Perhaps I shall have a stroll and take in the grey. There is much more to consider. Singed returned from the boundary market and was greeted by an old familiar stench. Blighted veins now stretched across the subject's back. The infection originated where the bone connected to the chamber. Singed quickly made a new formula and gave it to the subject. A piercing shriek spread around as the skeleton structure fractured and reshaped. The beast within began to emerge, the chimeric properties finally revealing themselves. But then, the transmutation slowly stilled. Singed increased the flow of the chamber. The subject trembled violently as he increased the dosage with every second. He could no longer handle the ripping flesh and growing skeleton beneath. The body would not accept any more of the toxins. Pressure built inside the chamber, and eventually it released a flood spewing out of the hoses, seals, and blood vessels. A series of snapping metal sounds followed. The subject freed himself. An instant later, he was staring into Singed's face, reopening the old wounds and feeding the old rage. They struggled briefly until the subject grew limp and collapsed. A single word escaped his throat, and then all indicators of life faded and the body finally settled. No heartbeat detected. Singed applied several drops to the subject's left arm. No response. He then dragged the body outside and disposed of the remains in the sump. Once again, scientific progress is stifled by lesser creatures. The only consolation is that even failures add to the vast reservoir of knowledge. When Singed returned to his lab the next day, it was destroyed. The front door ripped from its hinges, equipment shred to pieces. Nothing was spared. Everything covered with the same deep slash of sharpened metal. After hours of examining and comparing the marks, the truth was confirmed. The subject had returned. But now Singed had to find him to start the next phase. What was the word the subject said before it collapsed? A name perhaps? I'll start there and see where the search leads me. And that is where this short story ends. Riot likes to hide a lot of hints about the champions or their reworks in these teasers. I think it is obvious that we are talking about the newly reworked Warwick. From what I understood, pain helps the transformation, so maybe his passive will make him stronger based on missing health. Also, his limbs regenerate, so I think it is safe to say there will be a lot of healing involved. But tell me what you guys think. If you have any theories, I would love to hear them. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, you can click the little like button below, possibly subscribe if you are interested in the lore, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Facebook and join me on Discord. Again, thank you so much for your support, I really appreciate it even though this was a short video. And as always, thank you come again.